Hello, folks. Welcome to this episode of On the Board, where we take a look at ongoing projects and up and comings. At this point, I'd like to introduce one of the projects that I took on concerning the 67 Spider-Man series, the 3-season, and in particular, the beginning with the second season, as well as the third, where Ralph Bakshi took the reins, so to speak. And again, even more particular, a specific episode known as Revolt in the fifth dimension, where we find our boy here and what is on the chopping block as far as the art table goes. Ralph Bakshi, as you probably know, is responsible for some of several animated classics. Probably best known for Fritz the Cat or, say, Lord of the Rings animated series. And countless others. I mean, American Pop, Fire and Ice, Coonskin, Hey Good Lookin', Heavy Traffic, etc., etc. But just before he took on the Kranz project, for Kranz Animation, that is, in the later part of the 60s, he was working on Rocket Robin Hood for Grantree and Lawrence, who were soon to go bankrupt, and that was why the transition from the first season went over to Kranz. Quite an interesting story. He was encouraged to steal bits and pieces of the Spider-Man animation concerning the swingings and face shots and etc., etc. And apparently this particular episode too, Revolt in the Fifth Dimension, where he went to work on it. Quite a wild story, actually, being up there in Canada, having to skip the border, warrant out for his arrest, if I got this correct. He had a partner and collaborator named Johnny Vita. Remember that name, okay? But Johnny Vita got stuck back in Canada, did not cross. Ralph, by, I don't know, his wits, a little bit of fast footwork and stuff, made it across the border, pleading with some smooth talk with the border patrol dudes to let him back in. Anyway, quite a wild story. Vita wasn't as lucky, but anyway, enough about that. The point was to concentrate on this particular episode. So what I wanted to do was recreate some of the cell stills where you'd have the figures of the individual Spider-Man and our boy Infinita. You may recognize him. I've drawn some pictures of him earlier and painted them, colored them, whatever. These are, now, what I'm going for here is basic line work, as you can see, almost like coloring book quality, you can see. But soon, as soon as I took on this endeavor, I realized I was going to be able to, kill two birds with one stone. I was going to be able to render some of the most popular cells that would be used throughout the episode again and again, right? That being the pics of the face shots where the jaw is moving, or the particular body shots you'd see repeated through, just with different backgrounds throughout the episode. But not only create those and just have a lot of fun doing it, but to also get familiar with brushwork with ink, brushwork on ink rather than tech pens, right? Which was something I wasn't familiar with. So I thought I'd go ahead and do that. Here you can see like this line work is actually thinned in. It's not so much brushwork, a little bit, but I also want to mention that I had some trouble too when I started. It was a number 4 watercolor brush, but it had a split tip. Unfortunately, it was flawed, so I was getting a fork at the end of my tip. But neither here nor there. Got another pen and went to work on it. Now here what you see is that, sorry, I got ink on my fingers there. Here what you see is a picture of the same picture of our boy Infinata, but this is, what you got here is a painted over photocopy of the previous work I showed you, right? So it's acrylic on paper, straight acrylic on paper. We got a peacock blue darkened, we got a bright red, and as you can see, there's outline work. Now I want to say something about this inking. What's important to remember is that, well, this is what I found when beginning this project with using a paintbrush for inks. The lines you render that you want to put in, you want to try and get them in on one stroke, right? This is what you, ideally, this is what you'd want to do. Let's take this line here, for example. You want to come in like this and just one graceful stroke. That's important. What you don't want to be doing and you don't want to be seeing is something like this. Come in and, you know, lift, lift, scratch, scratch. Should be one stroke. That's the point. And I'm not there yet, but what I'd like to say is that the reason you want to do that is you want to maintain a graceful sweep in the line. You don't want a broken or staggered line, meaning the taper or the deviation from thin to thick and vice versa. You want it graceful and gradual. Now there will be times when you'll come in to render that one stroke line and you don't have enough paint on the brush, so you have to go back and dip. So in those cases, when you come back, two things you should remember if you want to keep your line looking fairly graceful and not breaking away from its graceful taper, again, thick to thin. What you do is you come into the line. Okay, say this is your line here, right? This is the beginning, this is the end. And you get halfway through and you're out of paint, but you know you have to follow through. So what you do is you redab, you come back in, but when you put your paintbrush in, make sure, remember, if you push more, your brush fattens, so your line will fatten, right? Don't push as much. That will determine the thinness of the line. So you want to make sure you're thin enough to fit within the existing line, right? And then you want to sweep it out. Now, a lot of you might be thinking right away, well, if it's going to be thinner, then when you come out the other half of the line, it's going to be thinner than the line. Don't worry about that. What you do is you gradually, as you get closer to that point of cutoff where you left off before, that's when you apply pressure to thicken the line gracefully, and it'll just merge into your line. And what should happen, your ideal will be the look of one sweep. That's the idea there. I hope that helps somebody. So here we are with another one of the main poses of our boy Infinata here. This one's quite large, so I had to back the camera up a bit. As you can see, these are the original inks, so you can see where I've left correction fluid too, where I've gone in and touched some things up here and there. Looks like some spots here anyway. This was actually quite large. I made some photocopies of it and actually did apply some of the paint, the acrylic paint, to those photocopies of the original ink. Anyway. And you'll see those later. But right now, I want to ask a question. Have you ever seen those guys in the park? I don't know if you've whereabouts you live, but some of the public parks, I don't know, you can find them anywhere, really. I was going to say you see it more in the big cities, but the guys in the morning who do Tai Chi. Usually when we think about martial arts and stuff, we think about, especially today with MMA and all that stuff, we think about power, strength, speed, all those kind of things. But Tai Chi is it's more like the art of moving slowly. Now, why do I mention this? Well, what I want to mention is that if people are used to doing different types of work with oil paint, something a little bit more intricate, photorealism, etc., etc., if you go in and start to try to render things like this that are more, cartoon-like or even like a coloring book quality, don't be surprised if you find that your hands aren't accustomed to the lines, right? Take the line work of doing the inking. I'm saying this kind of art here is a different form, but it does require a certain amount of respect so that you may do it. So what I'm saying is any habits that you have picked up in whatever type of artwork you're doing may at times, your hand will be doing things that your brain is telling you, wait, you don't have to do that. It's like retraining yourself. I guess that's what I'm getting at. It's not as easy as you think at first, but then once you start getting the hang of it, it gets faster and faster, so to speak. But it's like Tai Chi too. Anyone who thinks that martial arts, that particular martial arts being, the art of moving slowly, if they think it's easy, I would say, yeah, have you tried it? It's not as easy as you think, and that's what I'm getting at with this stuff. Because I do a lot of stuff that's a bit more realistic and some oil painting too. And this is one of the things you find. See, I'm finding these simple lines, as simple as they are, aren't so simple to render until your hand gets used to doing such things. That's what I'm getting at. Now, anyone familiar with that series will recognize, and this episode in particular, will recognize this as one of the more iconoclastic pictures of our boy Infinata standing on that giant taloned hand. But getting back to the technique and the line stroke thing, remember, still, look at this. Hands bring a separate idea into play here. Whereas, again, you want to be rendering one stroke lines, right? Obviously, if you were to draw the fingers as like, straight lines with rounded tips, you end up with things that look like hot dogs. And if you're drawing hands and fingers and stuff, that's not the case. That's not what they look like. So, but still, if you look at this, the intricacies of this, you're still looking for this particular technique. That is, you're still looking at simple one-stroke lines. But here it's a combination. Like here, you'd come up the wrist, around the ball of the joint here, up along to the first. The beginnings of the finger's attachments, right? And to each phalange, right? You're doing sections. 3 on each finger, 2 on the thumb, which is different from the fingers. But in combination, all these single stroke lines add up to your fingers and hands. That's kind of like the ideas behind that, all right? Still, again, while rendering these images, coming up with the main ones, and there are others that I've shown on other episodes. One, a large one of the head, one of the figure, etc. But I'm showing these ones now because they are not on the previous. But yeah, so moving on. But even before Spidey gets to that point where he's looking at Infinata on that giant hand, we see another rendering of that hand in this particular part of the production, or the episode. Yeah, it's the scene where Spidey, as he ascends the staircase of mystery, he gets to the top of the stairs, and a large taloned hand reaches out from a doorway that he can't resist, and he reaches out his hand, and it clasps his hand and pulls him through into Dementia 5, if you remember. But again, you get a chance here to look at single stroke lines, right? that all combine together to make the digits and the full structure of the hand. This is another one, using the brush on the line work. Basic cartoon imagery, right? And again, another shot. Same scene, but showing the full body. This is the original inked version. You can see the correction fluid put in later. This is before colors. This actual picture is actually colored. You'll see it in other episodes, I suppose. Not sure if you have seen it, but whatever. You can find it on the others. Yeah, at that point, Spidey, this is where he is gripped and pulled through into the door that brings him into Dimension 5. Now, my next drawing here is of one of the most iconoclastic headshots of Spidey, next to one other. I'd say it's the most one. This one's used again and again on a close up when he's talking, and basically this portion of the mask bobs up and down as he's talking to the viewer. One of the funny things I'd like to mention about this, anyway, when I talk about them being iconoclastic, what I'm actually saying is that between the seasons, right, 1, 2, and 3, these pics or cells would be used again and again and again in various episodes over and over again. But when they use the cells over again, they just basically put them on a different background for each episode, giving it that flavor. Same thing with the swinging portions. They were used in Grand Tree Lawrence as well as in the Kranz productions, the last two seasons as well. Again and again, swinging especially. And it was funny. Ralph Bakshi, that is, was saying that had Stan taken, or Stan and Marvel Comics basically taken more of an interest, or to be more supportive, meaning funding for the series, he could have done a lot more. And Kranz was his attitude was, Kranz animation, that attitude was, if you didn't make deadlines, you didn't get paid. So Ralph was on a mission. Look, we're not missing any deadlines here. It was his first opportunity to have his own studio, and that would go on to allow him to make Fritz the Cat, etc., etc. But so he'd do what he could, and he'd joke. This is the truth, but he'd say, with those swinging clips from as far back as Grand Tree and Lawrence, those things that were first established, if he was, if he had to make up for time in the episodes, he'd show those scenes. Now, luckily, they're pretty damn good, right? And they're exciting to watch and stuff with all the funky music and that. But he'd use those scenes to fill in, right? Use them as fillers, time fillers, to make up the episodes. He'd say, I kept that son of a bitch swinging. That's the idea, right? But another thing about this particular image is the paper that it's on. This was rendered, like I drew this and inked this in 2024, yes, but at the same time, this paper comes from a sketchbook that the last drawings that were out of it before I went to do this were like from 1989, right? And so 1989 plus however long I had the sketchbook on me before I actually started drawing. That I don't know. Well, so we'll say 1989. So, this paper is like over 35 years old. Now, I can see it yellowing and stuff, but you probably can't. But when it comes to this, the black and white ink stuff that will be rendered for photocopying, it doesn't matter. So I figured you better use this stuff. It's pretty good paper. Why not use it? Especially for this, something as simple as cartoon work. So I went ahead and did that. And there's several sheets. And as I pull them up here and there, I'll probably have a tendency to mention that this paper's over 35 years. Yeah, it looks pretty yellowy, but that'll be just fine. And I've gone ahead and made photocopies from this as well as others, and it's turned out white and fine. It's just fine. And so here's what I'd call the second most iconoclastic headshot of Spidey in the entire series, right? Next to the one that I just showed you previously. But this particular one was more Ditko-ish, if you notice. The mask and stuff, the shape of the eyes and stuff. It's less, I don't know, it's like one would seem more Grey Morrow-ish, and this one would seem more Ditko-ish. So who knows who actually made the images? Someone does. Someone may remember, but it was, a long time ago when they made the production. But this one was more Ditko-ish. And Ditko was more of a... Now, I used a brush on this for this line work, right? But Ditko, in his comics, was more of a tech pen kind of guy, right? So he didn't have a lot of that paintbrush line work. Now here we get into some of the other characters. This is Atham, I guess you call him the opening protagonist. He's trying to escape his planet with the library of his culture and history from a planet that Infinita is destroying, and he's going to make a break for it, and he's talking to his co-worker, friend, etc., what have you. So a little alien dude. Now, one of the things about this is, I can say, like, colors were later added to this, but this is the original inks. As you can see, the correction fluid, that's why it's not colored. I don't know, I don't want to use the word never, but I've kind of taken on the idea that I will not be rendering colors onto original inks ever. That's something I do as a little kid, right? I guess in my teen years, when I didn't know better, didn't really know about the process. And I find it works so much better if you render your colors, whatever method you choose. But I'm talking about tangible, stationary supply, nothing to do with keyboards here, folks. It's better to work on top of a photocopy of your original ink. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. Now, one of the things I should mention about Atham here is that, you see this oval shape? Let me tell you something, folks. One of the challenges you're going to find if you're just learning to draw, or you're just learning how to... this specifically, in using a brush, these lines, like arcs, ellipses, etc., are pretty damn hard. It's pretty damn hard to do. I'll tell you. You can see in my line work where... I could have, I know, I guess I shook, or I flinched here. You can see the bump in the line loses its gracefulness. But if you get a rough line that's fairly uniform in thickness all the way around, you're pretty good, right? So the line doesn't have to be so sharp. But I tell you, it is hard. And what you want to do, like, for example, a line like this, you want to anchor your hand down and kind of like you want to drag it or pull it across the page. Don't try and draw it in. You want to pull on a brush, right? As they say. And I'll tell you, it's a hell of a lot harder than you think. Man! I mean, it was hard enough to just draw it, but I didn't think about, well, then you got to paint it in, or you... Yeah. But I don't know, I guess something like that comes with practice. What I realized in doing this was that I needed to get myself... I started thinking about French curves, right? But then I thought, no, what I need is a flexi curve. It's like a ruler, but it bends and stuff, so you can make your own curves, so to speak, So that's what I had decided there. Now, remember, like, a lot of this stuff that I'm explaining here is going to seem obsolete to some people. I mean, let's face it, folks. Some people aren't even using never mind not using a brush, they're not even using pens. Some aren't even using pencils. And they're on that keyboard. And I just want to say this without being offensive. A lot of the things that I'm talking, I'm sorry, but I'm really not talking to you about these things. I'm not speaking to you about these things, okay? Me, I'm about stationery. It's like, it might as well be 1970. I'm talking about paste ups and X-Acto knives and that whole bit, because I think there's something to be said there. It's not about tooting one's horn. It's about, here you are, the artist, the physical, It's your hand and your stationary supplies and your skills that come into play in it. No, none of that. Those aids. And I'm not putting those aids down. I'm just saying that's what this is about here. So I'm sorry if some folks are thinking like, why is he doing? I get it. I get it. But yeah, it's geared towards, you know. I suppose there's a part of me that hopes that there's some people out there, especially kids aspiring to draw and stuff, that have that, you know, that passion, that quality, that potential to learn, the potential to develop, and a little bit of talent that's had a kickstart from their youth. Because that's usually how it happens, folks. You know, it doesn't all come down to talent, but once you get to a certain stage, it's that golden period between, I don't know, like 9 and say 13, where you figure out pretty soon, you know, what you're about as an artist and whether or not you're going to be doing this for the rest of your life or not. Anyway, I'm preaching, but yeah. So a lot of this is standard stationary stuff, so don't get lost in my rants about it. But there is a lot to rant about it when you're actually doing it with your fucking hand. Sorry. And so again, during that conversation Atham's having at the beginning before he takes off in his little rocket ship, we're not given the name of this particular character, but whatever. Same principle when it comes to the work. You know, simple line work again. Cartoony. Even in the drapery and the wrinkles and stuff. It's all the same. Again, you got an ellipse here. Little bit of degree of difficulty. That's me, though. I'm saying some people may find this easy. Like, I don't know. Maybe some people are like fucking Giotto, right? Remember Giotto? The story of Giotto? If you're not familiar with it, he was the kind of guy, someone asked him to draw a circle, and he had the skill. Now, this isn't a circle. This is more of an oval, right? It's an ellipse or whatever. But he had the skill to take his pen and do a perfect circle. So basically what that would mean is, if this is the starting point, he'd go down, come around, and when he got there, he was back at the starting point, and he had a perfect circle. Now that's sick, kind of like God-given stuff. I'm not, you know, trying to practice to get there. I don't think that's a skill acquired. I think that's a skill you're born with. But for me, I'll tell you, these ellipses and stuff, wow, they're tough. And it takes me a lot of concentration, and I find that my stroke is very slow as I'm dragging it across the page. Anyway, same idea though. Basic cartoon imagery. Now, speaking of Atham and his buddy, that brings me to another point. Here's a rough sketch of parts of those opening scenes where they're having their discussion before Atham's departure. He's briefing him, right? Letting him know what's going on. And this is a rough sketch of that scene. Penciled work. Sorry if it's not coming in too clear. The pencil line is kind of faint, but I'm hoping I can make my point anyway. So anyway, oh, by the way, this paper too is from that same sketchbook, over 35 years. I don't even know why I mentioned that. Again, yellowing and stuff, but for my purposes, same deal, right? And this will be black lined over, cartooned out, right? And the point about this I want to make, though, you're gonna look. Like I said, like if you're used to doing more detailed stuff, or you're doing painting or whatever, portraits, whatever, and you're using a lot of, you know, light and dark, you're considering light sources and, you know, the intricacies of shading, whether it be, you know, cross hatching, or, you know, or whatever technique you're gonna, you know, you might put in your rough sketches, and you know, you're etching, you're constantly shading, and your hands will be doing stuff, you know, you're in autopilot. You've been doing this stuff for years and whatever. I look at this, it's funny because if you look, you can see this within the structure, the skeletal stickman kind of forms of the little dudes, right? And then as I'm drawing it in, my hand starts going, and you can see shadowing and shading and stuff, which is stupid because this. Oh, sorry, which is stupid because this isn't that kind of thing. It's a cartoon image, so once that line work's put in, that'll all be erased anyway. But you're gonna, your hand, neuromuscular memory, and your brain kind of work against each other at times when you're learning something new, right? So, don't be surprised if your hand wants to do one thing while your brain knows what its goal is, if that makes any sense, right? But don't worry about it, I guess. I mean, if it happens, it happens because it'll all get erased anyway. I mean, the pencil work, that is. Pencil sketch, they're having the same conversation as they're in front of their mega computer where all the information from the history of Garth, which is the name of their planet or whatever. Garth? Anyway. And they're saying their goodbyes, right? And before he jumps into his ship, whatever. Before Atham jumps into his ship. But again, you can see like a lot of etching going on, right, in the rough sketches. But it's all nonsense because that'll go because only the basic outlines will remain on the cartoon image, and all that line work will get erased. But in the back, you can see. And I want to mention something here, something about straight lines. If you're doing a rough sketch and, it's a cartoon image, you're going to render in this case with indie ink and a black brush and stuff. Remember, don't worry about your straight lines so much. Get the rough idea of you can do hand-drawn lines is what I'm saying. You don't have to you don't have to rule in with a ruler or a straight line. You know what I mean? Until it comes time to lay down those black inks, then worry about the straightness of your lines. But otherwise, if you're doing choppy stuff like this, it's okay. You can do that. And I think that's what I was telling myself here, so that when I do go in and render the black outlines and stuff, that will be a time to get my ruler out so I can put in the lines straight and true. And again, 35-year-old paper. Now, while I was getting into these, the old series, the old 67 series, all 3 seasons, whatever, I found myself jumping into other picks too. Like, for example, this one here doesn't come from that same episode, Revolt in the Fifth Dimension with Infinata, as I've been discussing. This one is, in fact, from an episode known as Phantom from the Depths of Time, I believe. And I started working in on that. I couldn't help but notice that his structure, although he's yellow, his structure is a lot like Infinata, the kind of lobster-like, crustacean kind of look to him. He's kind of cool too, and I thought, and I traced him out. I gave a rough pencil sketch, and then just, again, a lot of this had to do with getting familiar with using a paintbrush and India ink. That's one I got from there, but there's one image that I got from this particular episode that really grabbed my eye. Let's take a look at that. Oh, but before I do, I just want to mention, I look at this and I think, there's probably a good chance that the person that designed this character designed Infinata too. And I would like to know who did what and where, right? I'd like to ask Ralph Bakshi the questions about Grey Morrow and what his contributions were, what he actually drew and didn't draw. That would be interesting to see. Another fantastic artist from that period. But anyway, let's take a look at the one that actually really caught my eye. And that's this boy right here. It's Igor. Now, if that isn't an iconoclastic cartoon image of Igor, whether you're taking it from Frankenstein, etc., what have you, from classic horror, I don't know what is. This is the original ink drawing I did of that. This image is one of the main cells from... It's his talking cell. Most of the characters have the headshot at least one headshot where if they're showing a close-up, they show it and then the jaw is moving and he's talking, right? Oh, this is Igor's. And you can see my correction fluid under the eye here still. Again, that 35-year-old paper again. India inks washed right through. Yeah, a bit of touching up here and there and that. I remember I went ahead and I started coloring this image. This whole image is actually colored, but I want to concentrate on something first. If you want to see the entire image, you can find it on different episodes of the On the Board series. If not there, Sticky Notary, or the other would be... No, between those two, you should be able to find it. But anyway, I did want to go ahead and color this, but my first question about it was, like, I was looking at the image from the series and going, oh, look, what is that? They got, reminded me of the Frank Zappa song, Camarillo Brillo, where it's like, she had gray-green skin. So what's a gray-green, right? I had to come up with that color on Igor. I thought, what the hell is that? What do you do? So I came up with something, and I got an example of that. Let me see. And so, yeah, I mucked around a bit, and I came up with it. What it is, okay, first of all of this stuff from this 67 series project, it's all acrylic straight on paper, right? And at times, some of the India ink, when I do my photocopies, I'll go over with a black acrylic as well. Sometimes not. Sometimes I'll just go over some of them with the black India ink again when things get muddled up. Because sometimes when you're painting over those photocopied images, it muddles up the weaker tones of the black that's been rendered. So you have to end up doing it again. Like, it's not a technique I would recommend. But anyway, I'm sticking with it while within this project. But anyway, back to the skin, coming to those tones. Oh, and by the way, if you want to see the full image, like I said, you'll find it on elsewhere on the episode. I know I put it up with a lot of other colorful stuff. But anyway, this skin tone, the two tones I used was a straight gray, just labeled gray. Gray acrylic, right? Gray acrylic, but then adding forest green. So I'd start with the gray pigment and then just bring in a drop of forest green, mix it, another drop, mix it, bring it until I had the right hue. Now at first it came up too dark green. So I simply added some white, brought it down until I had it. That was my gray green. So it worked out well. I was happy with it. But I just love this ugly boy here. It's just great. Big ugly face there, Igor. I thought it was great. Some people happen to find this particular episode to be their favorite out of those. Mine is, hands down, Revolt in the Fifth Dimension. I don't know why. Whatever. It's for that 70s kid back then, it was just one of those, I don't know, it always stuck with me. But anyway, there were a lot of other fun images elsewhere. And I'd continue to go and find my other colors for some of the images that were, of course, again, this is original acrylic on the photocopy, if you see. But as you notice, the black areas that were done with the India ink, they kind of got a gray tone in them. So sometimes when you're putting in your colors, it'll cover those lines and you have to go back. Like I look at this one, it works, but it would sharpen up if I came back and re-entered my my line work with India ink again. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I haven't. This one here, I simply just started in with the color, so we'll see. Whatever, it's not that critical. But anyway, no, just went with a straight peacock blue when it came to Spidey's blues. Now, here's that scene again at the top of the staircase of mystery, right? Where the talent hand comes out and grips Spidey's. But this is the one where the color's been rendered. Yeah, again, just acrylic on paper. Oh, and a little something about the yellow used here. This one worked, but I think it should have been a little bit deeper brown. The original, if you see the series, it's kind of a brownish yellow. This works, though. It doesn't matter so much. But incidentally, what I was just telling you about putting in the inks again or going over them again with black. Well, in this one, I took the India ink that was already there and I went back with a black acrylic. So it's all acrylic now, right? So even my fine lines on the webbing and the fingers and stuff, I went back with black acrylic, not with this paintbrush, but actually was a number 2. And I went back and I just, you know, because when I washed in the red, for example, it just blurred all the webbing line work, really faded it out. So I had to go back in and do it. That's why I say it's not a recommended way of doing these things, right? You're going to run into trouble, but I figured I might as well be consistent with them as I was going through them. But yeah, happy with the colors there. That works. And following up with that full shot that shows the actual figures and stuff. You know, basic cartoon images again. Again, I think the brown here, if you see the episode, should be or the brownish yellow should be a little bit more darker in the brown or whatever. But yeah, peacock blue for the blues, whatever. Did in fact go back in and do my outlines again. You can actually see on some of the lines here where you can see the slightly faded grayish tone of the photocopy plus the re-rendering of the ink over top. You can see it in certain spots, but whatever. For these purposes, remember, it's simple cartoon work. It you know, you need your lines to be complete, but you don't need them to be perfect. Whatever. But there it is. That's a bunch of these cells or freeze frames from the series, like the main ones from that particular episode, Revolt in the Fifth Dimension. I have done more. I've done 2 of the main iconoclastic figures as well. And you'll find those in other episodes, but I'll describe them to you. One is the full head, of course, of Infinita. I think on the board number 1 and 2 open up with that particular picture. And the other one is a full figure one. I just did a blue wash, right? I have gotten into the backgrounds, which we'll get into in part 2 and 3 of this particular episode. It's broken into 3 parts. This is the longest one of them. This is actually a remake of the first recording of this particular episode. But there is a 2 and 3 to come, and that's where I show the backgrounds and stuff. But the 2 iconoclastic images of Infinita are that big headshot with his jaw moving, where it's just his head, right? It's just his head. And the other one is a full-figured one where he's standing on 2 pillars, these rock platform things with these wild backgrounds going on in the background. But in my version, it just has the blue at first, but later I get into the background work. So capping this one off, check out episode 2 where I get into a short segment on the photocopying process and what I had to do and why you would see certain things. Tune in again.